welcome to another fantastic Faena Rose conversation. Tonight we're going to be discussing a topic that's important to everyone, and that's how to live a healthier and longer life. We're going to be talking about the science of longevity. In collaboration with Atria Health and Research Institute, we've brought in Dr. Nir Barzilai, who is the president of Lifespan and Health Research. And Dr. Barzilai, why don't you give us a little snippet about what we're going to be talking about tonight, a little preview.
So aging has a biology, right? We know who's old and who's young. What people didn't realize until recently, that this biology is what causes disease. And what we know to do, and our big revolution, is we want to spend time on our health rather than spend time on our disease. And we'll figure out how we're going to do that.
Fantastic. So as we like to say, strap in and get ready for another fantastic Faena Rose event.
And before we get started, I just want to thank our partners for today. Today is the first collaboration that we do with Atria Health Institute. They're a membership-based healthcare company that is at the forefront of the science of longevity and precision medicine. You all got a book, and you can find a little bit more about them. They have they have one in New York, they've got one in Palm Beach, and there's another one coming in LA. You really, really want to check that out. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our moderator for the evening. He is the founder and co-CEO of Mind Body Green, the leading independent media brand dedicated to wellness. He is the host of the popular Mind Green podcast, the best-selling author of Wealth and the Joy of Well-Being, which he co-wrote with his wife, co-founder, and co-CEO, Colleen. They've been featured in the New York Times, Entrepreneur, Fast Company, Vogue, and many more. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Jason Wachob.
Thank you, Alonzo. Great to be here to talk longevity with you tonight. Show of hands, who's going to live to 100? Microphone not on. Can I scream?
We are reading lips.
Okay. Is it on now? Nope. This is better. How's this? Can you hear me? Okay. Who's going to live to 100? Nobody. Okay, a couple of you. Maybe you'll change your mind. Well, we're going to talk about it. Such an honor to have pioneering. So my eye longevity is not good. We'll talk about that. We have pioneering scientist Dr. Nir Barzilai. He is a chaired professor of medicine and genetics of the Albert Einstein College of Medicine and president of the Academy of Health and Lifespan Research. Dr. Barzilai studies the benefits of centenarians to gain biological insights, the protection against aging. And to that, he is a director and principal investigator of the largest center to study the biology of aging. Nir, welcome.
Thanks. Thank you.
You adjust me here.
It's okay, you need to hear me, not him. Fine.
Exactly.
Should I ask the questions, maybe?
Exactly. I don't have good answers. Can you help my eyes? There we go. Stem cell. Oh, I don't know if we want to go there immediately. So, to start.
Stem cell is after 8 o'clock today.
So I'm sure you've seen on social media, there are a lot of biohackers proclaiming they're going to live to 100 or 150 or forever. Let's do a reality check. In your view, what's possible in terms of lifespan for, say, us 40-somethings, 30-somethings in the crowd?
I think they're all above the age of 70. They just look 40.
It's Miami. It's possible.
So look, maximal human lifespan as a species
is 115 years. That's a statistical workup. It was in a Nature paper. We kind of accept it. If you want to say 120, it's fine. Okay. So that's kind of our limit. But we die on average before the age of 80. Actually, average age of death is decreasing in the United States now. And the point is, between 80 and 115, there are 35 years that we can actually utilize without talking about whether we should break it. And I think we could break this limit on lifespan, but not today. Okay? So I think we can come closer and closer to our maximal lifespan as a species. And when I say we, is the people in this room.
So how do we get there?
So look, what's true for everyone is to maximize or optimize 4 things, right? Your exercise, your diet, your sleep, and your social connectivity. Okay? And you know that, okay? You all know that. But the point is you have to maximize it. What do I mean by maximize it? If you're doing 7,000 steps, maybe you can do 10,000 steps, right? If you're kind of dieting and it doesn't go well, consider a time-restricted diet, consider low carbohydrate, consider Mediterranean diet. There's always things that you could do that also will be better for you, because we don't have a good answer of what's the best of everything, because the best of everything depends on individual and their environment. But you have to find a way to maximize, to optimize your lifespan. This is before getting to medications. And there are at least 4 medications that are FDA approved that should be used more by doctors because they target actually the biology of aging. I want to just make sure that you understand. There's a biology of aging because we know who's young and who's old, right? That's not. It's important in the sense that not only you know who's young and who's old, you have friends that look much older than their age, and you have friends that look much younger than their age. So there's a biological age and a chronological age. So that's where we have a hope. That's why I'm looking at 100 years old, because their aging was slowed. But so we have this biological age, but what you have to understand is that this biology is what drives age-related diseases. You can be born with genes for Alzheimer's, okay? If you heard about ApoE4, okay? It's a genes for Alzheimer. If you're homozygous for that, you're likely to get Alzheimer when you're 60 or 70, and you die when you're 70 or 80. But when you're born, you don't have cognitive problem. When you're 1 year or 10 years or 50 years, you don't have that. You have the biology of aging that brings this disease out. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to target this biology of aging before you have a disease. And we try to slow your aging so that you don't get these diseases.
So you mentioned Alzheimer's, dementia, cognitive decline. I think the point is your genes are not your destiny. Just because you have the ApoE4 doesn't mean you're destined for Alzheimer's. There's lots you can do in terms of lifestyle modification, 10, 20, 30 years to get ahead of this. With that said, if we look at baseline, if I'm listening and I say, how do I stand? So you can do some genetic testing just to get like your baseline of genetics. What else should we be looking at in terms of blood work, in terms of biological aging? You talked about. How should we assess our state?
So first, I would say there are 2 stages in this longevity. First, you have to get there, okay? You don't want to die in the meantime from heart disease or from cancer, right? You have to get there. What's nice about Altria sponsoring that is that they're good at getting you there, okay? Then when you're there are things we should do. How do we determine what's your biological age? There's lots of things out there. For example, I measured my biological age by 10 different methods. And I'm anywhere between 20 years younger than my age to 4 years older than my age. So you understand immediately the problem. And I'm not saying that each one of those tests is not revealing something, but it's not really enough. Not only that, we have kind of methods when we can determine your biological age, we can determine the average lifespan that you still have, okay, statistically. But if you intervene, if you maximize your health, right, and you change and you exercise and everything, not all those biomarkers become younger. Okay, so it's not only to discover your biomarkers, but biomarkers that will change and show you that if you're doing things or you're taking a drug, your age is actually decreasing. Now, I'm leading several efforts here, but I want to tell you the coolest thing that I'm doing. We measured 5,000 different proteins in the blood of 1,000 people. And when doing that, we can know, we have an instrument, of course, with artificial intelligence and everything. We have an instrument that we can take your blood and basically tell you your biological age and will be quite accurate. But in a second paper, it was a Nature paper. I'm just throwing out this because those are real advanced. We not only can establish your whole age, but we can establish the age of each one of 22 organs. Okay, we can tell you your brain age. We can tell you your liver age. Now, generally, if you're a slow ager, okay, most of your organs will be slow agers. But we find out that there are people who are slow agers, but their liver is aging really quickly. So is the liver leading your aging? Can we discover something? Can you stop drinking, or do you have cancer or something like that? The same with brain age. We have subjects that are kind of young and their brain age is old. So I think what we're going to do to have in the future, we're going to have a blood test where we could tell you your biological age and also which organs should we watch. And that will mean also what treatment is going to be better for you as we prevent your aging.
I think it's a good point because the biological age in and of itself doesn't really mean that much. But if you're identifying certain organs, like obviously if you're 60 but you've got the brain age of a 40-year-old, that's incredible. But if you're 40 and you've got the brain age of a 60 or 70-year-old, that's very problematic because versus, I'll just use kidneys for example. We want everyone to have great kidney health, but you got 2 kidneys. You can live with 1. So you can actually do something about it. Versus, hey, I've got the biological age of a 35-year-old, great. But maybe, once you start to look at the organs, it gives you a lot more information that's actually actionable. Otherwise, it's not actionable if I've got a lower biological age.
Correct. So you need both biomarkers that will change because of your action, right? And also biomarkers that will tell you not only your age, but where are your problems.
So you did this test. Can we get this test today?
No. This is research. This is research. Look, everything takes longer than you would want to, and it's done in a research. And I'll tell you one of the things that we're pushing. God help the government now because we're kind of stuck with several projects, but we have 4 drugs that can target aging that are FDA approved right now. That we're not using enough. And so we are taking blood from all those studies and we're looking at what we call omics. I mean, we're doing millions of tests for each individual that took this drug. And we're going to find out of those million things, which are the biomarkers, 5, 10, 50, 100, 20, I don't know, whatever it is, that will really give you most of those information. And we're going to measure it before and within a year after treatment to see which one of them are changing, with treatment. And I think this will give us a blueprint of how we proceed. It's just that, by the way, this project is called FAST, and it's already 2 years old. So FAST is not fast, but it will be in time for you guys.
And what are the 4 drugs?
The who's the heckler here, and how old are you? So the 4 drugs are, I'll tell you the generic name if somebody wants to shout another name. So one is called metformin. The second is a class of drug that's called SGLT2 inhibitors. Farxiga. I don't want to, there are 4 drugs like that. I don't want to do promotion here. The third is the Ozempic kind of drugs. And the fourth is biphosphonates. This is osteoporotic drugs, but people who were on these drugs somehow have half the cardiovascular disease, and they're doing better. So those are 4 drugs that are FDA approved, and in huge amount of studies and good quality studies have showed. So what they have showed is the following. They were all developed for a certain disease, okay? So the drug companies did a phase 3 trial for those diseases, and they found that, hey, it treats this disease, but it also prevents several other diseases, not one, several other diseases. And they also noticed that those drugs not only prevented several other diseases, but prevented overall mortality. In a very short study, 32 months or 4 years, it had huge effect, not on a specific disease mortality, but on overall mortality. The first part of that is that we knew from the lab that those drugs are targeting what we call the hallmarks of aging, and also that if we give them to animals, the animals live longer. Okay, that's how we get to those drugs. So those drugs are FDA approved for something else, but any doctor can repurpose that. It's legal because it already had safety. It already has efficacy. We already have years of use. And so those drugs are really something that we should use more than we do now.
So intended usage, disease management, but you're using them essentially for longevity benefits. And maybe start with metformin, because I think that's the one, and we could segue to GLP-1s too.
So every drug that we ever had, okay, will save 100 and kill 3. Okay, you know that. You see the advertisements for drugs and you know that. If they were only doing this list of bad things, they wouldn't have been approved, okay? So what we're trying to do is really find the best 100 and avoid the 3 that are going to die. And we're going to do it because this is part of what AI is promising us. We'll have enough data. And the paper that we're writing now has those 4 drugs. And how do you make a decision? You have a patient who's coming to you and say, I want something, I'm done with exercise. I don't know. I need something. I feel I'm old. I think I'm not concentrating anymore. I need something. Which drug will fit best this patient? Okay, this is what's coming next, because remember, the revolution here is we want to treat your health. We don't want to treat your diseases, okay? We want to make sure that you are really concentrating of what you can do in the biology of aging so that you don't get those diseases.
I think that's an important point. I liken it to like the cake and the frosting. This is you got to bake the cake. You mentioned nutrition, sleep, exercise, social connection. That's got to be the bottom of the pyramid. That's going to be your foundation. If you don't have that dialed in, you just can't prescribe your way to health. It's not going to happen. You need that base. But what if you do establish that base, maybe you can only achieve 70 to 80% of your health span. This can get you all the way. And so I do want to spend time on metformin specifically, because traditionally that's been diabetes, correct?
Well,
Or like how what's the intended use of, like, how are you using metformin?
So the real story of metformin is that, by the way, metformin is an extract of the French lilac.
Yeah.
And grandmothers used this extract in the 1900s and actually made it a drug in 1920. So between 1920 and 1950, it was used for people who had inflammation or had arthritis or for flu or for prevention of malaria. Actually, this drug was doing things with aging. But then it was discovered that people who had diabetes had lower sugars with this drug. So it became a diabetes drug. And when people were treated with metformin and had diabetes, people started noticing people on metformin have less cancers, they have less cardiovascular disease, they have less Alzheimer and cognitive decline, and they have less mortality. Okay, so metformin is a good drug for diabetes, but it's a powerful drug for aging, which people missed. By the way, serendipity. I was a fellow at Yale in 1987 when metformin came to the United States 30 years after it was in Europe, but that's another story. And my job was to find the mechanisms of aging on metformin on diabetes, okay? And a lot of people are coming to me and say, you're wrong. Aging is not the mechanism of metformin. Metformin is doing something else, and give me my paper. And I say, yeah, it's my paper. I know. And that's not the only thing it's doing. It's doing something specific for diabetes, but part of it is through its mechanism on aging. But by the way, another interesting thing with metformin, during COVID, there were 9 papers around the world that showed that people on metformin had half the hospitalization and half the death, which led to what we call a clinical study. A clinical study is a control study. You get the drug and you have a placebo or another drug. And in this study, where they gave metformin within the first 3 days of COVID, usually in the first day, it prevented hospitalization and death by over 50% and long COVID by over 60%. Again, it shows you when you have a drug that targets aging, you think it's metabolism, but no, it's also immunity. It also probably makes the body more resilient to deal with a severe disease like COVID.
Well, if I think about metformin and diabetes, I think about glucose, insulin. You see a lot of people walking around with CGMs these days. How do you think about that more specifically, managing glucose, sugar consumption?
So I don't believe that those drugs are working through glucose for aging. I'll give you one reason for that. Who heard about rapamycin? Oh, wow. No, I don't think this audience is well educated. I'm out of here. Okay. Rapamycin is a drug.
That's good. We don't want people taking rapamycin.
We don't want people to take rapamycin. But rapamycin is a drug that when you give to all the animals in the world where it was tested, they all live healthier and longer. Okay? It's really the most robust anti-aging treatment. But what it does, it actually increases glucose level. It actually causes insulin resistance. Okay? So there's actually discrepancy. So you can have things that target aging without lowering glucose. Okay? Glucose in this sense is not really that important. It's not really the major mechanism of those drugs. Another thing is biphosphonates don't do anything with glucose. Okay, those are other drugs that are for longevity. So I'm not saying I also use glucose monitoring because I have this obsessive thing and I want to know. But and by the way, it lowers glucose in each drug a little bit different. Okay, there's actually a subtlety in how they do it, but it's not through glucose. Now, if you're asking me if low carbohydrate diet is good, yeah, it's good for you, okay? But those drugs are beyond glucose.
So in terms of, let's spend a moment on lifestyle. So you mentioned diet. I think nutrition is so emotionally charged. It is so divisive. What is your view on what's tried and true in terms of nutrition and what we know about what we consume and how that ladders up to our health span?
Yeah, didn't we say that we're not going there? I thought, well, look, I think two things you have to remember. We don't know. I talked about the importance of having a clinical study where you take an intervention and you do it. You take a group and some are doing that and some are doing something else or having placebo. This really does not exist in the nutritional field. Okay, so you can have people who are trying diet. So I'll give myself as an example. Since before COVID, I started doing time restricted diet. Anybody knows about 16-8 time restricted diet?
Sure.
Okay. So let me tell you why I'm doing it. When I started my aging research, 3 decades ago, the experiment that was always going in my lab, I would take mice or rats, a group of them, and half of them would eat whatever they want, and the other half got 60% of that. We called it caloric restriction. In those groups, and in, again, any animal in the world, when they were caloric restricted, they lived healthier and they lived like 40% longer. Really huge effect. And when we went out, aging wasn't popular, but when people wrote about what you could do about aging, they wrote, so you should have less for breakfast, less for lunch, less for dinner. But that's not what we did in the lab. In the lab, we brought the food in the morning, and those animals were hungry, and they ate all the food for the day in 20 minutes. And then they were fasting for 23 hours. So it wasn't only caloric restriction, it was also fasting. When we started giving them a little food throughout the day, they were still thin, but they didn't live much longer. Okay, so this fasting period is something that really upregulates your ability to deal with aging. And that's how it came to be. Now, we're sitting together and saying, well, how do we do that? And there are lots of ways to do this. There are people who are actually doing 4 days fasting 3 times a year, right? I mean, there's lots of variation. There are people who are fasting 1 day every week. I'm doing 16 hours fasting every day. Whenever I finish dinner, I started counting the 16 hours. And it's working well for me. It's working well for most men. And most men, as compared to women, are losing quite a bit of weight. That wasn't my intention at all, but you're losing a lot of weight without losing a lot of muscle. This is what clinical studies are showing. It's less effective in women in weight loss, but we don't know that it's less effective in benefits for aging. So I just told you a story of why I'm doing what I'm doing, and maybe it's not fair that I have rats and I think that I can do what rats are doing, but those are things that are coming in. And I think the good thing for me is that I never had a diet before, but I think if I had a diet for 3 months, I could break any day because I'm actually a foodie. But if I have, let's say I'm hungry at 11 o'clock, I'll have a cup of coffee without sugar or milk, and I'm not going to break if I have an hour to go. I mean, and then I can eat whatever I want. So it's actually easy for most of the people who are doing it. It's actually easy. Now, there are people who say, my glucose is too low in the morning, which is not true, but they cannot, not everybody can do this fasting. So then you have to think of other things and actually find the best intervention for you.
Right. To summarize, highly personalized, and there hasn't been a great human study where you can really do a control group. Animal studies are interesting, but they won't suffice. So I think that was the important point.
Right. You see, I could have said it as simply as you, and I'm telling them
You sound a lot more intelligent than me, though. So in terms of pharmaceutical interventions, there were four. I want to get to number two. You mentioned GLP-1s. So this is another one. There's disease management, weight loss, but many in our space are using microdoses for longevity benefits who do not struggle with diabetes or weight management at all. So you can talk a little bit about GLP-1s?
So, GLP-1s were developed for diabetes. Now, I'm a diabetologist, actually. So I have a fellow clinic once or twice a month. So I've been using GLP-1 for 10 years. And so it was a miracle drug for diabetes. Um, and um, so it was used for obesity, and it's very good in obesity. And then people say, but they actually lose weight, so why don't we use it for obesity? And so we use it to obesity, and now the reason to use it for aging. Now, so it's a really important tool. It's a really important tool. And by the way, obesity drives aging. In COVID, when you were over the age of 80, you had 180 times more chances of dying than you were in 20. But if you were obese, you had 8-fold chances of dying at every decade of life. Okay, because obesity actually drives aging. So it's a tool because 50% of the Americans are obese anyhow, right? So it's a really good tool. But let me give you an example of the complexity here. I had a patient who 3 months ago, a little bit more than 3 months, she was 75-year-old, and she had diabetes, and she was obese. And we gave her Ozempic. And she comes 3 months later, and she lost 50 pounds, and she lost her diabetes. Sounds good so far, right? She couldn't get out of the chair and stand. Because what happens, for every gram that you lose, half of it depends on individual, but half of it is muscle, okay? And half of it is fat. Although she lost 50 pounds, she couldn't lift herself because her muscle became even weaker than her weight to carry, okay? So now what we are trying to do, and we're working on that with Lilly, there are several drugs that can preserve muscle. There are actually several proteins that can preserve muscle, and we have several experiments with Lilly now, and I think Novartis have it too, with drugs that they will inject that will really see that you lose fat and not lose your muscle. But for now, what we're telling patients is you have to exercise. You have to exercise. I was meeting in Abu Dhabi, and the government will pay you for 1 month of Ozempic, but in 1 month, you have to show that in your Fitbit, you increase your exercise or your steps, or that you went to a gym and you have to stamp it every time. And if you don't show it, you're not getting more Ozempic.
Right, because you're already, what is it? You lose 1% of muscle mass a year on average after the age of 40. So when you're losing that weight, if you're not consuming enough protein, you're not taking creatine, you're not doing resistance training, to your point, you're going to lose way too much muscle. And it's going to be very hard to regain. You're going to suffer from sarcopenia, and its mobility becomes an issue, and it's problematic.
Right. But that didn't answer what happens with microdosing.
Yes.
And but because in my view, those Ozempic drugs, those GLP-1 agonists, have a major effects on weight, but not only. Okay, they target also specific mechanisms of aging. Okay, so even in thin people, will have to find out if they need a drug, how to exactly deliver it, or maybe deliver it for a while and see what's happening. But it has independent effects on aging that are independent of obesity, I'm saying.
And so we covered metformin, GLP-1. What were the other two?
SGLT2 inhibitors.
SGLT2. I'm not
Yeah.
familiar with what's that one.
Anybody is on SGLT2, Fasigia, David, what other drugs are advertised? I don't remember the generic name, but there are also drugs that were developed for diabetes, When you give them to animals, they live longer. They target the hallmarks of aging. And in clinical studies, they show that they prevent kidney disease, they prevent heart disease, they prevent overall mortality in significant way by 30, 40% within a short period of time.
And what was the fourth?
Biphosphonate, those are drugs for osteoporosis. Some are better than others. We don't totally understand what they're doing, but you know they are on the bone. They're acting on the bone, and there are lots of stem cells. A lot of our stem cells are coming from the bone marrow, and it's possible that they are doing something with stem cells.
So I noticed we talked about a lot. You didn't mention any of the NAD boosters, NMN, NR.
Okay, we said that we'll let them ask it.
Okay.
Who's taking NMN?
One, two.
Just one? So what, you're 80 years old? No, I'm kidding. So this is the interesting story. So let me start by talking about supplements. We know nothing about supplements, okay? We know nothing. We don't know if they exist in the bottles that we're buying. There's no clinical studies that show that they do anything, okay? But by the way, not all of them, okay? But generally, I should say something positive. They're good for the economy, okay? Not only that, there's a study in JAMA, again, I'm saying JAMA because it's a good paper, that followed 7 million people over 12 years. And they showed that the people who use multivitamins, multi-supplements had increasing mortality. Because it's not only what the supplement is doing, but how the supplements is interacting with other supplements and drugs, right? So Brian Johnson is taking 150 supplements, okay? We measured our biological aging in the same way at the same time 1 year, and we were both 4 years younger than our age. But for what he was doing, he should be 20 years younger than his age. The reason is not because he's taking supplements that are interacting with each other, and that's frightening. That's why I'm saying FDA-approved drugs that are prescribed by physicians are much safer and much safer than supplements. Now, I didn't answer your question because you were asking about NMN. So NMN is supposed to increase this NAD that is a nutrient sensing in our body that has a major role. And there's a lot of, and when we give it to animals, also my animals, when I give it to my animals, they become younger, okay? Or they become better, I don't want to say, they become better. In every study in humans, and I'm also the editor of Journal of Gerontology, I get a lot of those studies. They don't work. And it's really fascinating. I don't know why it doesn't work. I'll give you an example of a question that we have. We have a lot of microbiome, right? We have bacteria. And maybe the bacteria is eating all this NMN and it doesn't get into our system. Or maybe there's other human-specific things that we don't understand. There are many NMN studies in phase 2 studies for 5 years, and I don't see it. By the way, phase 2 study should be several months, so if it's 5 years, nothing happened, okay? But what I'm saying is, I don't know why, and maybe there is a reason that can be overcome, but we don't have clinical evidence that this is important or that it works.
I think we're going to open it
Sorry.
up for...
But the economy, you know. But by the way, another thing with NMN, there is a study where an investigator measured the NMN content of different manufacturers, and it was between 0 and 40% that was actually in the bottles. Okay, the shelf life, it's a difficult molecule. The shelf life is not great, and there are probably better kinds, you know,
Well, just to emphasize the point you made with Brian Johnson and the multivitamin, this idea of you're going to do a proper study, you isolate for one variable. So if you're going to take whatever it is you're taking, You don't take 150 things to see if it's actually working. You take 150 things, you don't know what's working against you, and so forth. But if you just take one thing, I'm just taking creatine, I'm going to know if it's going to work or not.
So look, I'm the president of the Academy, right, of Health and Lifespan Research. So we have the best investigator in the field, and I'm very optimistic about where we are going and how fast we're going, although it's always looks slow. But as much as I'm optimistic, there's a lot of noise, and the more we are successful, there's more noise. And this is really my biggest fight, is to come and say, hey, there's a lot of things out there that can be dangerous. We don't want to kill anyone on the road to success. We have to be really careful in what we're supporting. And I always say to reporter, my greatest fear with Brian Johnson is that he dies one day. And people will tell us, if Brian Johnson didn't make it, then why do you think you can make it? And so I want this alibi out already. Okay, people should know. I told you. Okay, but we have to be careful. And somebody who's doing all that on himself and says he's doing science, that's wrong. Science is not on one person. And whatever happens to him, and nobody else can adopt it. Certainly not the fact that he's taking young blood from his son. Okay, it's hard to imitate, but that's what I'm most afraid, that people are doing things that are dangerous because they just don't know.
I think we're going to open it up to questions.
Dr. Barzilai, my wife Elisa and I are huge fans of yours, been following your work for years. I have a couple of questions. One is...
Thank your wife, too.
Right here, Elisa. What does your day look like? What does your pill box look like? Like, what are you taking? And give us the dosages, please. And the most important question, what do we give our dogs?
I'll tell you, I'm going to be totally honest, but I'm not going to tell you the whole truth for the simple reason. Everybody knows that I'm taking metformin and I'm doing intermittent fasting, right? You just heard. By the way, 1,500 milligrams of metformin. And by the way, I'm 100 years old. Okay, but what I'm doing, I have a longevity doctor, okay? And I'm saying I have a longevity doctor, not that I'm not a doctor myself, but I don't want to have a fool as a patient, right? And with this longevity doctor, I come to him every 3 months and say, what should I try? What test should I take? How long am I going to do it? When am I going to stop? And what's the go and stop decision, okay? So I've been trying things, but just like Brian Johnson is publicized it, I'm not publicizing that because I really want to understand more about this medicine, and I want to do it. By the way, all are FDA approved. Okay, so I'm trying to do it in my own way, and I'm obsessive, and I'm taking the test in time, and I know what I'm doing. So that's me, and I'm not going to tell you what it was, but. By the way, I'm also exercising every day, okay, and I'm trying to sleep as much as I can in dark room. And social connectivity is not my problem. I never met a stranger in my life, so that helps. But that's what I'm doing.
We have a question to your left.
Dogs.
Oh, the dogs. There is a paper of giving NMN to dogs, and what they said, rejuvenating the dogs. I read the paper. By the way, the paper was posted but not published. So when I say not published, they didn't go through review process. But in my review process, these drugs didn't do anything. On the other hand, the drug that I mentioned before, rapamycin, there's a major effort in giving it to animals, and there are some results that are positive that are coming in. Some are not coming fast and some are not so positive. But I think the idea of testing in our friends is really a good idea. They're aging faster than us. They're sharing our environment. They have medical records. So I think you should tune up and make sure that your dog can enjoy healthier lifespan and longer.
First of all, thank you. Your talk has been amazing. I am a dog veterinarian. And the question I was going to ask before the question behind me was about the fact that many supplements, all supplements, and many things that are out there for animals are not approved by the FDA. And what you alluded to is the fact that you don't actually know what the content of that capsule is. So humans taking themselves and humans giving to their pets capsules may contain nothing but gelatin or 10 times what it says on the label. So I personally recommend to my clients for their pets, do not give supplements unless the manufacturer says that they follow FDA regulations. I think supplements should be regulated by the FDA because people are taking things thinking that they're going to help themselves, and they could either be taking absolutely nothing or taking something that's detrimental.
I think you're right, and that's an effort that we're trying to do. Look, because lots of the supplements have promise. I'm not saying no. Okay, they have promise. We just don't know. I think the FDA should have a different category for clinical studies. So I'll give you an example of where it's a little complicated. Mars, the candy bar, they did a study on 20,000 people that received either flavonoid, like chocolate powder, or a powder that tasted good but had no chocolate inside. And the people who got the chocolate powder had actually less cardiovascular disease and less mortality. Okay, so I believe chocolate is actually is an aging, is an anti-aging drug, is a gerotherapeutic. The problem. Please pass the chocolates. Chocolate is sponsored by Mars. Um, so, but the point is that Mars cannot go to the FDA and say, now I want on my chocolates to say it prevents cardiovascular disease. First of all, their chocolates are, they have chocolate, but they have other stuff there, right? They have the sugars and other things. But this is a problem in my mind. I think if you have a clinical study, like with the NMN, if the NMN had this clinical study that showed effect, it would be fine. But they don't have this pathway, and I think they should, and I'm trying to work on that.
I'm optimistic with Marty Makery taking over the FDA. They'll make a lot of change. There will be.
Yeah.
Hi. So I feel like even conservative American doctors agree with you on GLP and metformin, but I feel like they also really push statins.
I can't hear. Is there a microphone?
So I feel like even conservative American doctors agree with you on GLPs and metformin, and I feel like they also very much push statins. So I'm curious what you think about that.
Yes. So first of all, statins are very important drugs. Okay, for a specific disease, they decrease the events and mortality from cardiovascular diseases. Okay, and cardiovascular disease is the major cause of death. But when we give statins to animals, they don't live longer or healthier. So statin is not a gerotherapeutic drug from my perspective, okay? Again, I said it's important, okay? If you have high cholesterol, it should be lower, but it's not a gerotherapeutic, okay? That's how I distinct them.
What's your view? Some people, Peter Attia, our mutual friend, will say that PCSK9 inhibitors are more effective with minimal side effects compared to statins.
But that's true. By the way, I have high cholesterol and I have PCSK9
There you go.
as a treatment. And I didn't mention it because that's not a longevity thing. But
It is if it protects you against cardiovascular disease.
it's cardiovascular.
Yeah.
I'm saying not this
Sure.
is not for my longevity. This is to get there.
Sure.
Right? Um, um, so look, statins is a good drug for most people. Okay? There are people who get problem with muscles, some abnormality in kidney, so they have an alternative now. But I wouldn't say that all the doctors need to go to PCSK9, and also this is injection, okay, and it's expensive also.
Sure.
Okay, so I think, look, every drug is not good for everyone, and so we have to be aware, and there are alternatives, and we have to use them wisely.
Hi. Do injectable peptides work?
Injectable what?
Peptides.
Peptides. Injectable peptides. What's your take? Do they work?
Oh. So I had a company that was working on a peptide. So I think it's really dangerous. Okay, I think the major problem with peptides is the major problems with peptide. I'll say problems. Manufacturers are you don't know what they are producing. A lot of the peptides that are being produced, when you inject them chronically, you get actually antibodies against them. Okay, the antibodies against them can give you allergic reaction, but can also stop the action of the peptide if it had anything. This is a very unregulated thing. Again, there are peptides that I hope one day to use, but the way it's going on out there, for me, it's really dangerous. And if you're 100 years old, then those peptides are doing very well. Otherwise, I don't know if you should continue. You look young.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk today. I just had a question. So, 3 of the 4 drugs that you mentioned are diabetes or glucose insulin related. I guess in that, we didn't really get into the details of how that affects longevity in terms of, is it losing excess weight? Is it taking sugar out of your bloodstream? What is it that's actually expanding your life?
Okay.
Extending.
I was trying to avoid this question, but we're almost done. It's actually it's a fun question. So in our world, we have something that's called hallmarks of aging. How do you become a hallmark of aging? You show that something goes wrong, and if you fix it, in animals or in humans, they live healthier and they live longer or have less mortality. We have 14 hallmarks. It's not enough. We'll probably have more. But for example, telomeres is a hallmark of aging. If you heard about them, mitochondria is a hallmark of aging. The decline in immunity and inflammation is the hallmark of aging. And the way we test drugs is really to see if they're changing the hallmarks of aging. There's something really interesting. You don't have to change all the 14 at one time. You can change one of them and affect the others. Okay, that's really a very important thing in what we're doing, because sometimes you think that the drug, like metformin, right? You think it's doing something with metabolism, which is declining with aging, one of the hallmarks, but it's actually doing something in immunity. And maybe if metformin wasn't for diabetes, it became the leading drug for COVID, right? So yeah, that's what we have as far as mechanism. We have those hallmarks of aging that are interaction, and we're trying to target hallmarks of aging with one drug, maybe with combination of drugs, and really extend our health span and lifespan as much as possible.
We have time for 2 more questions over here in the back to your left.
Thank you. So I think clearly everybody here is interested in longevity, standing room only. The one term I haven't heard, and I think we've all witnessed people in our lives live with low quality of life. So how do you pair your study of longevity with quality of life?
Terrific question. So I want to tell you something about, and that's actually a good closing point. I want to talk about my centenarians, okay? The thing that I always was interested from the first centenarians that I had, centenarians are 100 years old, right? And I have 750 of them, and their kids and their families, big research project. So the centenarians live long, and we ask, just a minute, do they get disease when everybody gets diseases when they're like in their 60s? Or is their lifespan and health span, does it go together? And you know what? They are healthier for 30 years beyond everybody else. Okay? So it's not only that they live longer, they live healthier. Not only they live healthier, that's even not the coolest thing. They have what's called a contraction of morbidity. They are sick weeks in the end of their life. We are sick years at the end of their life, and they are sick weeks or months. 30% of them don't have any disease and don't take drugs, and many of them don't wake up in the morning. So live longer, live healthier, and have a contraction of morbidity. Isn't that what we're talking about? Okay, isn't that exactly what we're talking about? To live healthier for longer and die one day? I think this is what I meant by that. Now, I want to say something about it. The CDC, right, the Center of Disease Control, looked at the medical cost in the last 2 years of life of somebody who died at age 100, and it was third the cost than those who died when they were 70. Okay, so what we saw as a compression of morbidity, what the CDC showed, was actually what we called longevity dividend. It's a huge benefit if we can just be healthy. It's a huge benefit for the country, for the world. There's a professor, Andrew Scott, is in London Business School, and he said, guys, you're out of your mind. You don't know what you're saying. I said, what's wrong? He said, okay, so you doctors, you think of medical costs, but those people are not in the hospital, right? So what are they doing? They're traveling, they're shopping, they're buying houses for their kids. So they actually have an economical value that if you calculate it, it's like $360 trillion or something really incredible, which is actually why we are now able to come to politicians and said we cannot afford not having health span, right? I mean, I said longevity, but you understand that for me, it's more health span than longevity. If we'll be healthier, we'll live longer, okay? It's the same mechanism, kind of. But this is very important. It's important that we're talking about health span and not longevity, about living better for longer and not living sick for longer. I also want to say one more thing at the end, is that this is not only about older adults. People who survive cancer are aging rapidly. We give them chemotherapy and radiation, right? So we age them, and they need help, especially kids. Kids can get heart attacks when they're 35 years old if they recovered from cancer. So they need help. People who are HIV positive, or have AIDS, they die 10 years before others their age. People who are disabled, okay, because they cannot exercise and keep diet, they die early. And so there are lots of people who needs help. And also, if we're going to Mars, okay, and Elon Musk knows that, we're not going to go there to get there before we solve aging, because we'll get sick with cancer or cardiovascular disease there and we're not coming back. Okay, so what I'm saying, you're here because you're taking care of yourself, you want to be healthier and stay longer, but there's lots of reason for us to make progress and to make progress fast.
Our last question of the evening.
Sorry. Thank you so much, Dr. Barzilai. Really interesting. My question is regarding Prolon. What are your thoughts on Dr. Longo's work and Prolon for longevity or anything else?
I don't know what
Question,
Oh.
Dr. Walter Longo, his work.
Oh,
and Prolon, his fast specifically?
Yeah, so I'll say it this way. Dr. Longo believes the growth hormone are a problem, and we totally agree. 60% of our centenarians have genes that affect growth, okay? That affect growth. There's only one growth hormone. There are many growth hormones. And you can understand it simply by thinking that we need growth. We need growth. We need a lot of growth hormone to develop, to have children, to raise our children. But then at some point, after the age of 50, we're starting to break down. So we have to shift the energy from growth to protection. It doesn't make sense to invest in growth when we're breaking down. And so this whole concept is about getting growth hormone down. He has other things, nutrition. There's a nutrition part to it, but I don't want to get into this, just that you know that growth hormones, that by the way, there are lots of people in Florida that are treating themselves with growth hormones. And it's probably dangerous for women more than men, but it's the other thing. You have to actually stop growing and take care of your aging. And that's important to know.
That's all the time we have for tonight. Please join me in thanking Dr. Barzilai and Jacob.